Azure Virtual Desktop architecture. So when it comes to Azure Virtual Desktop, so we have two things over here. One is customer managed and another one is Microsoft managed. So what are the parts? What are the parts which is customer managed? So as you can see in the left side, we have a client, ID client, customer managed. So ID client customer has to manage either if it is in a corporate environment on the company provided laptop or desktop, or if it is in the employee, bring your own device. So this is not Microsoft responsibility. This has to be uh, managed either by customer or for the user if it is a personal laptop. So all the clients, we have a client available for web, which is HTML based, and then we have for Android, iOS, and for of course Windows we have. Okay, this is completely a customer managed. Sorry. Then we have customer managed Azure VMs and service. So customer has to manage the virtual machines in the right side, as you can see. If any applications, any Azure files or storage are Active Directory, and also part of Azure Active Directory. So this has to be managed by customer. This is not managed by Microsoft. Okay, so Azure Active Directory part of it is managed by Microsoft when it comes to the availability and backend infrastructure. But as a configuration wise, you have to manage the Azure Active Directory as well. So this is it related to your VMs, etc. So non-virtual desktop Microsoft managed services. So Windows Virtual Desktop, Microsoft Managed Service. So when it comes to your gateway, broker, web access, diagnostics, Azure SQL DB, everything is managed by Microsoft. This is nothing but your control layer or access layer, you can say, if you compare with the Citrix or traditional VDA solution. Okay, so here you don't have any visibility. Okay, so this is completely managed by Microsoft. Only part you have a visibility on the right side, which is customer managed VMs and storage networking, and in the left side you have a client. Okay, so again, the component of Azure Virtual Desktop, the one which managed by customer, as I told you, we have a web access. Web access is nothing but it will help you to access your VDA over the HTML. So this is the service which will help you to access your VDAs or applications from the web, and also it hosts a service called feed discovery. So feed discovery is nothing but it will help you to discover your application and desktops. What are the things assigned to you. Okay, so that is related to web access. Second one is gateway, and everything, everyone who are from Azure, sorry, that like if you have a Citrix background, the moment you hear the name gateway, you should be aware that this is basically for the remote connectivity. For example, let's imagine you are accessing from anywhere or any corner of the world. So if you wanted to connect to your internal resource, you should have a gateway. This is nothing but, in a layman term, this is a VPN, you can say. Okay, not like the actual VPN, kind of VPN, which will allow you to connect to your infrastructure or your corporate network from a remote place through a remote device or anything. So this is a gateway which is again managed by Microsoft. Then we have a connection broker. This is nothing but we will have all the connectivity details, such as who, like if the user is having X number of application, what are those applications, all those things will be saved in the database, right? So the broker, connection broker, mainly cover that part. So it will control all the brokering or getting the information, what are the user application is available for this user, etc. It is as simple as your DDC. Okay, and then last we have a diagnostics. This is basically for the troubleshooting, where you will have a dashboard, all the connectivity issues, etc., etc. So again, this is not visible to the customer. Even if you request, they won't provide anything. It is completely limited to Microsoft product group. Okay, so this is in brief what Microsoft is managing, what customer is managing. So first thing, Azure Virtual Desktop. So sorry, first thing is Azure Virtual Network. So Azure Virtual Network lets Azure resource like VMs communicate privately with each other with the internet. Okay, so you are responsible to create the virtual network on your Azure cloud. So Microsoft won't help, or it is not their responsibility. Then Azure AD. So Azure AD is very important. Let's quickly go through what is Azure AD. Okay. So for example, let's imagine you have a corporate infrastructure. So you have your Exchange server, you have your storefront, or you have your any services. which requires authentication. For example, let's say SharePoint. So for example, this is your user, right? He is sitting his laptop within the corporate network. He wanted to access the Exchange or storefront or SharePoint, etc. So you cannot go simply and you can access, right? Because it won't allow. So because it requires authentication to secure your, whether you're authorized or, not unauthorized user, etc. So for that we have AD. So whenever you access Exchange, it will redirect back to AD. So you'll supply your credential to Exchange. It will verify with the AD. If it is a verified user and he is, authorized and he is authenticated, then it will provide access. Similarly, it will go with storefront or SharePoint. So everything is integrated with the AD. So if AD confirms that whether you are a right and authenticated and authorized user, then only it will allow the access. So this is completely when it comes to your network on premise. In short, okay. So in cloud, let's imagine this is the MS Azure. So in cloud, we have different services. We have Office 365, which is nothing but it will provide your Teams, it will provide OneDrive, it will provide Outlook, etc. Then you have your Azure subscription where you will deploy your VMs, your storage, etc. And then there are a number of other services such as Dynamics Cloud, so which will provide you MS CRM application, etc. So here, this is a completely a Microsoft thing, right? So here you cannot authenticate this way. Let's say I'm the user. So this is I'm here in internet. I want to access Teams. So if you directly go and access it, it won't allow. Why? Because it requires authentication. So since this is you're accessing from internet and your on-premise is not exposed to internet, you cannot bring your Active Directory over here. There should be something which will authenticate, right? The services. So to do that, Microsoft comes with a concept called Azure Active Directory. So by default, this Azure Active Directory integrated with all the Microsoft cloud services. For example, your Office 365 or your subscription, if you wanted to access, or other services such as Dynamics or Power BI, whatever you call it as. Okay, so whenever if I wanted to access Azure subscription, I'll go to the Azure portal, portal.azure.com. Then it will redirect back to my Azure Active Directory. Okay, so where I will present my credential. So if the credential is valid, then only it will allow. Similarly, it will go with the Office 365, for example, Outlook, AVD, or you can take Teams, etc., etc. Everything is integrated with Active Directory. So Active Directory is the one who is doing the authentication. If the authentication is proper, then it will allow the access. Otherwise, it won't allow. So this is where Azure Active Directory come into picture. So I hope you guys now well aware what is Azure Active Directory. So Azure Active Directory, in short, it is a cloud version of your Active Directory. Okay, so by default, you're going to create a users in Azure Active Directory AAD. So using this user, you're going to access your services. So typically, when you're going to create a user, it will end with, for example, test one. This is the user. It will end with one Microsoft.com. So whenever you see one Microsoft.com at the end, it means it is a purely Azure Active Directory based user. So it is not a on-premise user, nothing. So it is Azure Active Directory provider. So always it comes with on Microsoft.com. So now you may have a question. For example, let's imagine this is your cloud. This is your on-premise. Here you have Active Directory. Sorry, Azure Active Directory. Here you have your AD. Okay, this is your Exchange Online. So this is your storefront, etc. Here you have a Teams. Here you have OneDrive, etc. So now this is the user one. So if he wanted to access Exchange, he will use his credential, which is, let's imagine, user one @ vdabus.site. vdabus.site. So this is the user I created in the AD. So now if I go to the cloud, I have to create one more user, which is called user1.1 Microsoft.com or @ one Microsoft.com, whatever you call. Okay, so now the same user will have a two credential or two identity, one in the Azure on-premise and one in the cloud. So now your question, will it be challenging for the user to remember two things, one for the cloud and one for the on-premise? Okay, yes, of course it is challenging. So the best way to use a single credential in both the world, on premise as well as cloud, there is something called Azure AD sync. Azure AD sync. So Azure AD sync, what it will do, it will copy or it will sync your user from on-premise to Azure cloud, so that here in the Azure Active Directory you will have the same user, which is user one dot VDA bus dot site. So now this AM user, he can use his same credential, existing Active Directory credential, and he can authenticate to the cloud. So this is how we are overcoming the challenge of keeping the two identities. However, in still some small companies, they still keep both. I don't know what is the reason. I have seen this. So this is in short. So what is actually Azure Active Directory? How you can authenticate using Azure Active Directory, and how you can use your on-premise credential to authenticate to Azure Cloud. Okay. So this is very important to understand. Why? Because AVD will mainly works on Azure Active Directory along with your AD. Okay. So let's go back to our PPT. So that is the Azure AD part. And then Azure Active Directory Domain Services. Definitely you need a AD. So which I mentioned, either you can create a AD on the cloud itself, or you can create your Active Directory, or you can use your on-premise AD. So using a VPN, etc., you can have a connectivity to your Azure Active Directory to your network, Azure network. Okay. So even if it supports pure Azure AD also. So for example, let's say you don't have any Active Directory setup, so you wanted to go purely on Azure AD, still you can go with the Azure AD, that is also supported nowadays. Okay, and also it supports Azure ADDS as well. Okay, so that is, these two things are the identity part. Third one is Azure Virtual Desktop Session Host. So you should have a session host, either it is a Windows 10, 11, or I'm not sure whether they stopped Windows 7 now. So now it is like, since this is old slide, I think, so that is why we cannot see Windows 11 here. So technically speaking, you should have a Windows 10, Windows 11, Enterprise and Multi-Session, and Windows Server 2012 and above. So these are the things you need to create your images for the session host, and then Azure files or NetApp files to store the user profile. So in short, desktops, Active Directory, Azure file, and your applications and the network. So these are the things you are going to manage. Okay. So now it should be clear for you that what are the things I manage and what are the things Microsoft is managing. Okay.